can everybody hear and speak? Maybe the chat or any problem, just yeah, send us a message if there's any problem hearing or anything. Do you want to start, Sean? Or?
Sure. Yeah, I think the starting point for today is where we left off at our session, a very lively session on Thursday, and I've put a few questions. I've distilled a few questions from that came out of Ed's notes. And if you remember, we spoke about the importance of making the valley essential to the fabric of the college, both in terms of the curriculum and operationally. So one of the questions was, how could we make the valley essential to the college? Part of that that came strongly out of a couple of the groups was how can we engage students wholeheartedly in that? So that's in terms of the curriculum and the hidden curriculum, everything else they do around the college, and what might the tangible results look like for the students. So how can we hook them in to things that make it worthwhile for them? And we spoke about service and the importance of enrolling the community and using our approach to sustainability as a platform for engaging others in the work that we're doing. And I think valuably, I think you all made the point that we shouldn't be too instrumental about this, that there's value in focusing on the process of what we're doing and valuing the thing in itself, not just the produce that we get from the land. So I think those questions are kind of framing today, and Katie's put together quite a nice activity, I think, that's going to be really rich and a good way of us coming up with some tangible statements, maybe, or some ways forward, some next steps to take into practice here at the college. I think that's what we want out of today. Would everyone sort of buy into that?
Yeah, it felt like, just to follow on from what Sean's saying, it felt like obviously we've done a lot of talking over the last couple of sessions, and we wanted to try and make sure that out of this session we're getting really practical, and we also get as many people contributing as possible. So you might have received an email, but if you didn't, it's also in the chat. I've posted a link. It's the first message in the chat, which says Jamboard. And if you click on that link, it will take you. I'm going to share my screen with you.
I'm not sure it's in the chat, actually. Katie, is it?
Yeah, it's the first message in the chat.
Okay.
I can share it again. 1 second.
Oh, we've got it now, yeah, we got it.
You got it? Okay. Okay, so basically, once you're into this chat, you can see my screen, but you can also, you won't leave the meeting if you go yourself onto it, and then you can also contribute. So we're wanting basically everyone to be contributing. And if you look down the left-hand side of the screen, there's a little pen symbol, an eraser symbol, an arrow, a sort of select symbol, and basically a little kind of sticky note, post-it note symbol. If you click on that post-it note symbol, you can create your own sticky note to add your own ideas. So I just thought I'll describe what I've put down here, and then thought that we can all have a go at populating it, maybe splitting into groups and then coming back together again. So can everybody see it first of all before I launch into it? Has everybody managed to get access to it? Okay, let us know if you can't see it. So at the top of the screen in the yellow boxes are really what I think have come out of the last few sessions that we've had together as sort of the essential ingredients of what we're trying to do. So the first one is this sense of whatever we do being cyclical, being able to see a full process and a result at the end of it. The second one was the idea of ritual, that whatever we do has some mechanism to bring people together on a regular basis, maybe on a annual basis, it may be every week in a marketplace, it may, whatever that might be. to celebrate, share, and co-create. The third one was the need to be financially and operationally sustainable. So especially in these sort of straitened times when the college, you know, really doesn't have any spare cash. And the challenge of there being large chunks of the year when students aren't at the college. How do we make this idea financially and operationally sustainable? The fourth one was sort of the ecological principles that we're operating on. You know, at the moment, the gardeners are using all kinds of weed killer and various things. There doesn't seem to be any campus-wide set of principles that we are working to. Is it, you know, is everything going to be organic? Is it, are we looking at permaculture? You know, what are the principles that we're working on that everybody across the campus, not just in the Valley, but that the whole college campus can buy into? And finally, you know, lastly but not least, what need are we fulfilling? Are we trying to provide food for the college community or for a wider community? Are we creating biomass to use as energy in college boilers? Are we using it as an experiment, a research? Is it just a, you know, is it not just, is it a learning project? So it's really trying to look at the project from those different sort of core ingredients. And then in the green boxes down the side, we are looking at, you know, various different lenses that we can apply to those 5 essentials in yellow. So curriculum, you know, learning. We talked about learning with the head, heart and hands. So what are the learning opportunities in each of those 5 things at the top? The second one is service. What are, you know, how do each of these 5 things at the top actually benefit others or benefit the land? And the third one, again, last but not least, is what do we need in terms of people power, money, other resources, tools, whatever it might be. What do we need to make all of this happen? So that this first slide is just really a kind of overview, and then I don't know if you can all still see, but basically I've made a page for each of those sort of yellow boxes, and I've also added another square which says success. What does success look like in 1 year stroke 5 years? So on each of these pages, basically we were hoping that all of us can just work together over the next session to write down your own thoughts about each of these particular topics, you know, about the idea of it being cyclical, ritual, the financial operational sustainability, the ecological principles, what need are we fulfilling. Basically we wanted to split into 5 groups, potentially. Maybe it's just ends up being in pairs, and just really have a go, you know, spending 10 minutes of just sort of populating it as much as we possibly can, and then coming back together. And feel free if you think this is just my first stab. So if you think I've missed a yellow box or missed a green box or missed something, or you think something should be worded differently or whatever, this is totally blank canvas. Everybody feel free to contribute in whatever way you think you want to. So I wondered whether to start before maybe Magda can just sort of randomly split us into groups. I wondered whether can everyone just have a go at posting a test sticky note on this first page, just to test that we can all use it, because I'm thanks everyone for coming back. We had a great discussion. I wondered whether we could just go through, if everyone's still got access to their respective Jamboards. I can share my screen and show you we ended up, what we collectively ended up with, just for anyone who potentially can't see it. So I'm going to go back to the first page. This was the one that we were on. Okay. Does anyone who was looking at does anyone want to describe what's happening on this page or what was discussed? Is everybody unmuted? Maybe to kick things off, this one looks really well populated.
Did one particular group do that first?
Can you maybe through it? So in this page?
This one here?
Yeah.
Jack, Yule, do you want to talk us through that one?
Yule, do you want to?
This is like handoff.
I'm happy to do it. People have heard lots of me.
Yeah, I've spoken a lot in the last few days.
Well, we covered a lot of ground very rapidly, thinking about cyclical and seasons, and the notion of a harvest festival, and how all of the role of the food within the college context, whether it's running through the cafe or running through the school shop, and reflecting the seasons as the food that is of that season shows up, and thinking about also the gap in the summer and whether there could be some sort of farm interns, and the notion of a farmer or a school vegetable gardener who keeps the momentum and it isn't fully relying on volunteer labor from staff or others. And I'm not sure what else to add. Well, I think emphasizing the Valley and food production within induction week and within the student body in a much more significant way.
Jack? It's hard to hear you.
Yeah, I think we raised the question of just how to make this sort of school community-wide endeavor and not have it just be on the reliant on the energy of a few staff members and a small group of students. So we were thinking about those sort of moments when the school could be brought together to sort of share in the vision, whether it's in, as part of the school induction week. Sean mentioned that the Lighthouse was very successful this year, popular with the students because they had a great sort of induction week program. And it strikes me, especially as the Valley looks so incredible now, that and hearing some of the students in the last session talk about how they valued the Valley, having them introduce the school to it for the fall. And then we talked about Ashwin had this great idea that really sort of struck me, of having a sort of Friday night cookout that seemed really kind of doable and sort of flexible enough so that it doesn't have to be sort of a huge heavy lift. Sean, what else?
That's great. I think broadly, we were talking on Thursday about integration, weren't we? How sustainability can be integrated into what we do, and so the cyclical piece for us is about the rhythms of nature and integrating that into the rhythm of the college year to a much greater degree. And I think what we eat is part of that, and also celebrating kind of rituals through the year collectively could be a really good way of having those moments. That are the memories, really, I think, that students take away from them, with them. That those focal point memories are really important in their experience. So hooking them in and having it much more central to the wider purpose of their education and the college. And that hopefully would be an antidote to maybe students that have not really wanted to be involved in getting their hands dirty. If they see the wider purpose, then that will hopefully solve that problem and issue.
I wonder, Sean, whether also there's not, at the start of the year, just having, as much as the ideas of the Valley are embedded into different core subjects, having staff come together and talk sort of collectively with the students about, how the Valley is feeding into different parts of what they will be teaching over the year ahead. So that just that whole sort of, you get that sort of intellectual ferment and that connectedness. So it's not, again, just a series of little moments, but it's part of some bigger narrative.
The one piece I added, oh, sorry, go ahead.
And I was just going to say, one of the things that is a challenge that would help to address, Jack, is that students don't necessarily know what each other are doing. And so, with Ed taking on the last program next year, if the last students can make a conscious effort to share what they're doing and the purpose of it, then that they can build up that centre ground of connection with nature that goes wider than just the experience of those 15 on the course. So that's a good way of doing that, I think, and that involves staff as well. Sorry,
the other piece I was just going to add is making food really exciting. And I think for many of us, or a number of us, at least on who I know on this call, food has become a really dynamic and meaningful piece of life. And there's so much richness within the college, the student body, and I'm sure within the staff as well, to explore food more broadly and use.
It was a funny moment on yesterday's call when someone asked Ulrich, who's year 66, what did people complain about, back then? And he said, well, that was easy. There was one thing, food.
Yeah. But then there's the whole evolution of like the slow food movement and all of these chefs who are doing things with local food and bringing all of that spirit and that energy into the college would just create a whole new dimension of richness that could be explored endlessly, whether people go and catch some fish or harvest some stuff in the valley and make some fascinating meals. I think there's such potential there that we were never able to explore when we were at the college.
Yeah, I think also in terms of the cyclical idea of seeing the fruits. I think there's something also really interesting about how this connects to a wider community potentially. I mean, I think you've got one there, involvement of top chefs and things like that. You think of the sort of quite well-known chefs in Britain, like Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall, or with his River Cottage, that kind of thing. You could imagine people coming to Atlantic College, to St. Donat's, to have a food experience or something like that. If you're talking about how do you make this sustainable, it could be incredible. You have people staying on campus and really having it as a learning base for something which could be really lovely that the students get involved in. Okay, I'm gonna move on to the next one, so we make sure we talk about each one. And even if there's nothing written down, we can be putting the comments in as we go, but I'm sure you've all had discussions that may not have reached the page, so that doesn't matter even if there's nothing written down on them. The next one was about ritual, bringing people together. Just to recap for Peter and others who may have joined us, hello. The yellow boxes are basically elements that we've identified over the past few sessions, which we're seeing as sort of pretty essential ingredients. So the first one was cyclical, seeing the full circle, getting something out of it at the end. The next one was some element of ritual, so something that brings the whole college together in a way that is celebratory, is sharing, is creating and making the stuff in itself. So does anyone want to just contribute? Yeah, Harvest Festival, that was that's an idea I've seen it on a couple of other boards as well. If anyone wants to
an initial planting when everyone arrives, so everyone is involved in planting out.
I think that's a really, really lovely idea.
And I would advise salad, just because it can be a product that can go into the canteen all year through the seasons. There's over 50 different leaves I grow that are tolerant to our climate.
Could there be something to do with trees as well? A kind of, people use trees as sort of memories of things, like a tree per year, a year group tree, or something like that feels like it's something that you might even come back and visit. That's something that's done in a ritual, planted in a ritual way. anyone else have anything to add on this one? Okay, I'm going to move on to the next page, but please feel free to just be coming back and adding more thoughts.
Well,
and just to let you know as well that you can also be flicking, if you can see the top of my screen, you can flick between the pages and you can be adding things to these pages while we're talking. Oh, can someone explain what's Terra Madre Day?
Yeah, that's an annual day that the slow food movement has to celebrate food and justice around food, and it's a global event that the slow food movement has every year. So usually you can highlight endangered foods or endangered peoples who have endangered foods and tell their stories through the Terra Madre Day. And it's a lot of chefs are involved and a lot of farmers are involved around the world. So it's a really neat, I think it's usually around Christmas.
You were just reminding me of something, oh, that should say food. I'm working on a project. I'm building a new Jewish museum, and we've got a project. We've got a project at the moment where we're telling the history we're telling Jewish history through foods, and it's been really good. And we've started doing that with a whole lot of other projects as well, using food as just a medium to have other conversations. Apple Day, brilliant.
There could even be a sort of storytelling unit where you sort of, through using story as a tool to sort of tell history.
Yeah.
I can't write because I'm just holding my baby. But they can be
right for you.
Thank you. The daily ritual of harvesting for the salad bar. I don't know who does this, but some of the students daily.
That's a really, really lovely thing to say, that there's some just simple day thing, just absolutely basic.
There is an idea that we're working on in terms of, can you hear me? Am I? Yeah. In terms of having a shop and having students who, that will be part of their role, will be to harvest, to take either to the shop or onto the canteen.
I haven't been able to log on to Jamboard, but just a thought, in terms of the health and well-being of students and that link to all the elements of earth, ground, grounding, air, if there was going to be some kind of day or opportunity for students to join in someone leading that project who's experienced in the Buddhist practice of the elements, that could be incorporated in their health and well-being program too.
Yeah, I'm just writing it. I think it's really important, actually. I think you've touched on something really significant, that we've been talking very much about food, as if that's the only thing that you get from land. And I think we need to be really, really conscious that you get so much more, just sitting in nature, being in nature, is obviously, as you've said, for your well-being, incredibly important. But there's energy. We haven't talked about biomass that could come from the site. There's compost, all of these sorts of things. We haven't really talked about at all, including building as well, building with earth, from the earth. There's all sorts of things that can come from the ground and from the land that we haven't really touched on at all, that can be done in a ritual way. So I think that we need to make sure we see it as more than just about food growing. Okay. All right, I'm gonna move on to the next slide just so that we get through a little bit of everything. But as I said, feel free, if you can connect to the Jamboard, you can go through it and move yourself between the different pages and add notes. If you can't connect to it, just add a comment in the chat or tell us, and one of us can add it in. Okay, so the next one I'm going to look at, which we've talked about a lot, is how do we make this project, this idea of connecting to the land and making the land and the site productive, how do we make that financially and operationally sustainable? So how does it wash its face in a time that, you know, the college doesn't have a lot of extra cash or any? And how does it happen all year when, you know, there's clearly students are not there for many months of the year? Does anyone want to, so that I don't talk too much, somebody else jump in and anyone got any thoughts?
I can jump in. I mean, I think it's critical that whatever effort happens is viable from a business perspective, and there's no reason it should not be. So, but that means, I think, making an investment and actually having a business plan and figuring out exactly how much is required for tools and how much is required for amendments for soil, and what's the labor costs, and what's the value of the product that can be sold directly to the cafe, ideally, or the cafeteria, or other markets as well. But I think it's important to demonstrate that to students as well, so that it doesn't imply that food is something, or production is something that is only undertaken if you happen to be a wealthy school or a wealthy person or whatever. It's actually some livelihood, essentially. I think that's an important.
Absolutely. And actually, the process of writing a business plan is a massive learning experience as well.
I think that's where the Lighthouse comes in, really, because there's a whole set of social entrepreneurship skills there that are really significant and will be very good for students to follow through this project, I think.
Because Sam, there are some things being sold in the shop right now, is that right?
Yeah, so sorry, I'm just typing up a note as we speak. There is at the moment our shop is not run by students, and I'd really like to see it move forward to be run by students. We currently sell some snack type things in there, but also the eggs and chicken service, and that has made chicken service financially sustainable. So basically, that with the money that we get from the eggs pays for the food, and it pays for us to keep our flock going year on year as well. It's very, very small chicken service. I mean, that could potentially be expanded, but I think that could definitely happen in the Valley, because I can, like, just thinking of my house, that I'm a house parent for, the students love buying salad. When they go to Lantuit, that's one of the things they'll always come back with. Because of what's happening at the moment, students are going to have to stay so much more on campus, and if we can be getting them to sell things that they want to buy in there, but also just things that they are invested in here, from the chickens, from the land, I just think that sense of pride is what will start to bring them closer to feeling just feeling stronger about getting their hands dirty and being involved in here. I think it's all cyclical, and they need to feel pride in that.
Definitely. There's two notes that have appeared. One is needing a professional farmer who is also an educator to lead this, which I think is something that we've talked about a lot. The idea that actually, you know, you've got roles that are resource roles, are paid for roles within the college, you know, the head gardener and, you know, someone who leads the campus. And that if that person could be someone who had a competency and an experience both as an educator, but also in principles of organic farming, that feels like it's an easy win, because it's a role that's already resourced. Or has got a line of resource against it. The other one, now I've got lots appearing, The other one that I added was about the idea of farmers in residence. I've seen this work in other schools, where the Krishnamurti school that we've talked about previously, where recent graduates, so in the case of AC, the second years, some have decided to stay on for the summer months, so that and they get board and lodging and, you know, everything like that. And they are then the sort of teachers of the next crop of students. So what, does anyone else want to talk about? There's lots of things appearing. Somebody else talk.
I think there's a need to have the canteen and operations team strategically aligned, isn't there? You know, because there's such a lot of potential, and those routes and access routes in need to be built on, probably. I mean, there seems to be really good use and really good use at the moment of the canteen of the Valley food. I guess it's using that momentum to widen the connections, and then feeding it back into a decision making in the college, I guess.
Can I just ask? Sorry.
Oh.
Sorry, go on, Sam.
Sorry, I was just looking at Carissa's comment there. We do have in Llantuit, there is a group called Transition Llantuit, but I think knowledge is really key here. I think that first session that we had, where we learned so much from Alice and from Cami, and I think it would be great to have people coming in from the local community. That's not going to happen in this first term because of COVID, but I think knowledge is key. You know, we have got some members of staff who are really knowledgeable, but equally they're very, very busy with what else they do. I've just posted a few things about the WOOF scheme and graduates from permaculture courses, and potentially having interns for people who already have quite a lot of knowledge within organic farming systems.
Definitely. Does anyone have any?
I have a question, Katie. I'm just wondering how much the school currently spends on food. Like, or maybe we don't know, maybe it's just a bulk contract with
that's
the
really
provision.
Important. It's a really important point, because actually we talk about
I can tell you what the Chartwell's contract is, just under £1 million a year.
Right, but that probably includes labor and everything else,
it's
right?
Primarily labor, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea what it is on food?
I'm hazarding a guess that it's about a third of that, maybe, but you know, it's
okay. So about, you know, let's say
it's probably about £5 a day per student, £4 to £5 a day per student.
Yeah, and it's not a ton to work with, but something. And is it possible to, I mean, they probably have all their own food contracts set up, so it would probably be a renegotiation of a contract in order to be able to actually.
Although it is up for tender, like in the next, I think at the end of next year, it's up for tender again. So it's an opportunity.
Oh.
I think the other issue, at least in my conversations with our Chartwell's guy, is food provenance, you know, in terms of health and safety, that you have to be able to trace.
Yeah.
You know, where it came from, etc.
But if you could point to where it came from, that might help.
I mean, it's a good point, though. I've talked to our head of Chartwell's about using our eggs, and he can see the hens. He can go and pick the eggs up, but they can't use them. They can't use them within any form of official capacity.
Why is that?
I think it's all to do with their supply chain, and it's quite complicated, and it's not really anything that I know too much about, to be honest, but that's what he's explained to me, that they have to prove everything in their supply chain. And they have to spend certain amounts of money, I think, with certain companies, and
it's probably a certification process, but there are other schools doing this, so that I think that's the hope, is that there's precedence. It's just figuring out how they've managed to do it.
I think they were okay about salad. I had a conversation with them as well, I think that wasn't deemed to be a big problem, but we have to.
That's true, Alice, because they do use apples in August, September, October. They use them in a lot of puddings. They use chard, I think, and they use spinach.
Wow.
On the call, he might know more about what crops are used.
Eggs are deemed more high risk, so vegetables might be fine.
Yeah.
But they do tend to change the narrative from time to time.
I mean, in terms of it's convenient to say no.
Well, I had a conversation with them about salad once, in which I was told that one slug in a bowl of salad and its, the reputational damage to them would be catastrophic. So you get different messages at different times.
I think some of that's mindset though, because I've been an organic box customer for so many years now, and that is part of having vegetables, is you occasionally get a little bit of wildlife that you weren't necessarily planning on, and that is part of it's just part of the beauty of it, isn't it? Those things aren't dead because they haven't been killed with poison.
It is.
Graham, in last night's spinach, which I cooked up, Sally did point out that I had actually cooked a snail along with it. So
thank you very much.
Did it taste good?
She wouldn't eat it. I don't know why.
But I blame the person who washed it in the sink, personally.
I did wash it in the sink. There wasn't a speck of dirt on it.
It was a clean snail.
Exactly, a very clean snail.
I think just to go back to one of the previous points about precedents, I think what's really important is to, in terms of creating a culture shift with companies like Chartwell's or for anyone really, for the whole college, I think it's really important for us to be really clear that this stuff happens. It happens already, and it happens within the UWC community. We heard really inspiring examples of what happens in Pearson, what happens in Mahindra. I gave the example of the Krishnamurti School in South England, and there are others where they're in the case of the Krishnamurti one, where every single student is in the gardens for one morning a week, and they grow their food and they use it all. And so I think we need to sort of change the mindset, rather than say, is it possible, to say, why not? Because we know that there are people doing it, and we know that it is possible. So it feels like there have to be reasons not to do it.
Well, Katie, that the fact that the contract is coming up in two years or a year and a half is perfect. Like that's the opportunity, because it could be that the way in which that tender is written could attract different suppliers who actually are more interested in local food and and I mean, you could even build the farm right into that contract, for example.
Yeah,
so I think
exactly. You could be advertising that contract in a different way.
Completely. So planning for that and doing a business plan and thinking before that contract is up seems like a real window of opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one. Alice, maybe do you want to, because you haven't said much, if you're still there, do you want to talk everyone through this one?
Which one's this? Sorry,
This is the one that we discussed.
Just what principles it would be grown under. So whether it would be all organic, and then whether the whole campus would be organic. Certainly, as an organic farmer, I think that would be the ideal, but initially, certainly the valley and the produce, I feel it's very important to grow and teach organic principles to the students. Do you want to jump in, Katie?
Oh no, I feel like I've talked too much. Sam, somebody else.
I think, without wanting to repeat things I've said in the past, I think that whether or not the farm and the campus has been separated, I don't know, but at some point in time we had organic farm status, which I think has lapsed. We certainly farm the chickens to organic standards. I personally am to me, it feels wrong to be thinking about spraying and using chemicals on the wonderful land we have here. But I think I was also talking to the guy who now heads up the land, and we were talking about pollinator pathways as well, going, in different places around the campus where we can just plant lots of wildflowers to enhance the wildlife and support the bees, because we have 2 bee colonies on campus as well. Alice raised a really good point that, we also have to think about business here. We have to think about making money. We have weddings. So what goes for one area of campus might not go for another. I don't mean that in terms of organically, but sort of how manicured it might have to look. But I think all of us agreed that we really didn't want to see spraying or use of pesticides or chemicals on the land if possible.
I think again, it's also about a sort of a culture shift. I mean, I went to the beautiful wedding in a wildflower meadow where they had, mown an aisle through. It was the most sort of romantic, wonderful setting, and the idea that the only things that can be beautiful are manicured is something that maybe the college can challenge, at least in some areas. That wilderness is good and wilderness is beautiful is something that should and could be accepted. The other thing that we talked about was, I think you mentioned this the other day, the idea of ecological literacy, and we talked about the fact that it's difficult to make the whole college campus organic because it's just, and the reason why they're spraying a lot is because of, needing more people power to do it. But we did talk about the fact that, actually you've got a campus full of people with a lot of students, and that there's potentially, it's worth thinking about the fact that really should any student be leaving their educational experience at the age of 18 and not know how to grow food, and not know how to harvest it, and not know how to cook it, and to deal with those issues. So really, should there be, as part of the curriculum, a minimum amount of time spent on working the land, and that connecting to the sea as well. I think, Sam was worried, there's so many things that we're trying to do that are calls on people's time, but not to see them as totally separate. This is all about connecting to the land. It's all connected, so that potentially the idea that, throughout their college journey, every student has to be engaged in activities that are about connecting to the land in some form, whether that's working in the kitchen using food that's been grown, or whether that's actually tilling the soil, or whether that's fishing, or whatever it is. It's something that actually every student has to engage with. So
I think just to chime in on the subject of rituals, it just strikes me that at the departing second years, or the first years who are about to become second years, that at the end of the school year, that there's a sort of college cleanup doesn't sound very exciting, but like an investment of time in preparing the school for the next year. Maybe that's when they plant the departing year plants their tree, but there's that would be, if there's as well as like a harvest festival, that might be a nice sort of closing ritual, 3 or 4 days, everyone takes part in preparing the school for the summer and for its next intake, and also says farewell for those who are leaving.
Yeah.
There's also something quite nice about the second years passing on their knowledge to the first years, sort of teaching them what they learnt about how they maintain their crops, etc.
Definitely.
I've just put
another question. Oh, is there a campus land use plan?
I didn't hear that.
Is there a campus land use plan? Like this land is going to be used for this, and this land is used for that, and this land is managed in this way, and other land is managed in different ways?
Peter, are you able to? Okay, Peter's responded on.
There's
on
a master plan with respect to the built campus, but not, as far as I know. You know, if there's one.
It's something that we've been talking about over the last few weeks as being kind of absolutely essential. I've talked about it as a conservation management plan, because that's the terminology that I've used previously, that ties together buildings and land and people and history. But you know, a land use plan is a sort of a similar thing. But I think the raising the need to tie buildings and land together in a strategic way with student life, with curriculum, is kind of so obvious that we haven't really said it, but it's so needed. So that feels like a big. I'm going to just change this slightly.
I remember at Pearson College, so Cornelia Oberlander, who was Kurt Hahn's niece, who moved to Vancouver or via New York and various other places, she developed the land use plan for Pearson, and she was also the holder of the land use plan, so that any interventions that were made on campus had to go through her. She had to approve them at some level. It was really fascinating, and it was all a voluntary arrangement, but she was definitely the guardian of the land of Pearson, which is pretty interesting.
But it's so important that somebody held that there was a vision that everybody was buying into.
Well, I wouldn't say everyone bought into it. She was very much the manager of that vision. Generally for the better, probably. But
we wanted to get her actually to join this, but is she now sort of 97 or something?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one because we've got loads of really rich stuff to talk about, but I want to this is the final one, and maybe even the most important one, which is why the hell are we doing this anyway? Why is it needed? Because I think one of the problems that we've talked about over the past few days and weeks, even about the Valley in particular, but about the whole campus, is that, you know, everybody sort of knows that growing food and working on the land is a good idea, but until there's a really specific purpose, until it becomes essential, until there's something about what's going on that the college really needs and relies on in some form, whether that's food, for energy, for learning as part of the curriculum, as part of its outreach or something, until it becomes essential, it's not going to be valued, or not enough for the work and the effort and the resource to be put into it. So this question is really about really defining what's the need that we're trying to fulfill here, and how can we bring that to the forefront, so it's not just a sort of nice thing to do because we think we should be doing it, but that really, and I know it's never been that for everyone who's putting in the hard graft, is far more than that, but in terms of the whole college really getting on board with it being essential, what's the need that we're fulfilling? Feel free to just type away, plonk it down, or say it.
Health, from food and to mental health, health of the whole system, I'd say. Starting with the food, and then all its benefits that go out from that will come with the food. Sorry, I'll mute.
definitely. So all of these that are coming up are quite sort of macro, you know, and sort of more sort of principles in terms of particular things that you know, like providing food for the school canteen or providing enough energy to power a boiler, or, you know, are there any sort of just really ways in which we can make this as specific as possible?
Can I just say something? Somebody's posted up here about the nature deficiency, which is something that I read quite a lot about a few years ago, the nature deficiency disorder. And as a result, I spent quite a lot of time working with young people in the scouting movement to try and get them outside much more, because within the British school system, kids are inside so much. And for me, that is the overriding, probably one of the overriding principles here, because whatever comes out of this, whether it is that you are on the sea, whether you're growing food, whether you're interacting with animals, be that wildlife or farmed animals in a positive way, so that you are getting something out of that, whether you are planting trees, it is connecting you and grounding you. And for me, that's like the overriding principle out of this, and it's something that we have lost connection with. So for me, that's the one big need that we need from this.
Definitely. I'm just arranging these so we're into the different categories. So, sorry, may not look very arranged. Lots in service. I'm just thinking, you know, in terms of curriculum, service, what do we need to make this happen? Is it, and is it, this is a question really maybe to Peter particularly, but one of the comments is, in order to make this happen, it must be part of the curriculum. Otherwise it's too easy for people to opt out. How essential is it to you?
That was my comment.
Oh, excellent.
That and the nature deficiency were my two comments. So I'm scoring.
Do you think?
No, and this is what Sean, you know, Sean has been leading this year. Is we need a different. The IB's in need of reform, full stop. But we're in need of a different curriculum, and I think, you know, Mickey has been working on it for a couple of years. This place-based curriculum. We do have such an exceptional campus, and we do not really take advantage of it at all. But I would suggest the number one complaint of students is they don't have time to do any of, which is an excuse because they're watching Netflix in their rooms instead. But it is that they're required to do that in order to graduate, you know, from the college. So I just think it needs to be part of the education reform.
And do you feel that that is something that is imminently eminently possible?
Yeah, no, I do. You know, once again, Sean and I are part of this education reform group at UWC International, and the paper will be presented to the UWC International board at the end of the month, championing the modular approach to our approach to the IB, where we would ask students to be excused from at least one, if not two, standard level courses, so we could have, you know, more place-based modules that students would take, sort of 50 hours as a minimum length, you know, so you could do 3 modules that would be equivalent to a standard level course if you kept the traditional IB hours. So I think we need to create that space and time within a student's formal curriculum if we're going to drive this through. I think once it's sort of the lead the horse to water, I mean, once they drink, I think and then generations will talk about it, just as generations used to talk about the rescue services. I mean, not anyone arriving was just really eager to be part of the rescue services because they had heard from alumni how meaningful and powerful that was. I'd like to believe this engagement with the physical campus could develop as that idea as well.
And how feasible do you think it is? You know, we've talked quite a bit about the need to have, you know, a person stroke people as a sort of, you know, anchor member of staff, either part of the ground maintenance team or part of the teaching staff, or actually crossing over both. How feasible do you think it is for that role to exist, or for a current role that is currently got somebody in it to morph?
So I'll give you the brutally honest COVID answer. Right now, there's like, we're cutting £1 million out of the budget for next year just to survive. So it would have to be in the near term donor driven, and we're developing a fundraising campaign around the seafront. I think a similar one could be developed around the use of campus, etc. So certainly from my perspective, the easiest way to create new positions is to ring fence them through donor, because that introduces an idea. It's protected money. No one can claim it should be spent on something else, versus trying to build it into the regular running budget where you have to convince a lot more people. So I think in the near term, that would be my hope, is that we, you know, in Green Atlantic or any of the funds that we're putting in the Atlantic Appeal, that we would get the money that could be directed towards this. Because the truth of the matter, for the 2020-2021 budget, there's zero capacity in that budget as it stands now. If we get all the students who hopefully will come, then there might be some money liberated, but in their sort of contingency planning going into next year, it's really to the bare bone.
We shouldn't underestimate.
Does that mean that in a way it's even more essential that it becomes embedded in the curriculum? Because then at least,
I think that's the other aspect of it. But I don't know what Sean was about to say, but I do think there's a real appetite amongst the donor community to support this sort of thing. Like, certainly in my time here, the idea of innovation and rethinking curriculum and reconnecting with the campus has resonated with alumni far more than sponsoring scholarships and, you know, building new buildings sort of thing. So
yeah, and it is an integral part of any teacher's role and any staff member's role, actually, you know, getting involved in the co-curricular program. So locating it there initially so that we can develop the prototypes to see how learning might happen, you know, gives it some security, I think. So it's what we do isn't contingent on extra resource, but it's embedded in what we do. And the other thing I guess I'd say to that is to pick up on what Yul was saying, I think in one of the sessions during the week, around the hidden curriculum. And it is about emphasis and culture and ethos and creating those moments of experience that make it significant for students. I think this whole approach is as much about that as it is about the formal learning and the modules that are developed, as important as that is.
I also think, Sean, on that front, we need champions and people that the students can go to. I mean, in some ways, Graham serves that role with the people who are connected with the Valley, but obviously is a full-time job doing other things. So it's that there's a face to it as well, I think, is really important. But
do you think that the idea, I think in one of the previous slides, we saw the idea of farmers in residence, be that recent graduates or alumni or anyone else from the community. So the idea of basically giving people board, lodging in exchange for work, is that something that's being considered, or do you think could be viable as an idea in the short term? It's sort of in a way.
I would think so. I mean, I don't have the level of knowledge with respect to our relationships with local farmers, but I know, for example, that there's hay bales down on the lawn that was allowed to grow, you know, that a local farmer has obviously been given license to harvest the field, which I think is fantastic. I'm it's great to see. I have no idea what arrangement was made for that to happen.
I meant also students. I'm saying farmers in inverted commas.
Yeah, yeah.
So either local farmers or just students, recent graduates, alumni.
Yeah, no, the whole alumni
want to do their year out. Maybe
is also something Sean's been working on developing as an idea this year. So it's definitely in conception been developed, but in practice has not been realized, other than some really short-term, at least an alum, you know, supporting Lighthouse sort of thing.
It could be a good way through this, Katie, I think, to put some
I think
application on the bones of that.
Yeah, I would really push for a real professional farmer to lead the effort, because I think that will then generate a lot more value in terms of produce. It'll make it a lot more serious. It'll make it more inspiring to the students. Like if it's a really like a real production operation, that I think that will really add a whole nother level to it. But to do that, you need someone who really knows what they're doing. I mean, Alice is, I think, a prime example, but.
I've just written, I'd really like to help in any way I can. You can see I've got a slight childcare issue at the moment. But, you know, if I can give time and just cover my childcare, I would like to do that. And then in terms of helping plan.
Yeah, stay on campus.
Sorry?
Yeah, stay on campus.
But I guess the point I'm trying to make is that farming is like a profession, and if you want to do it well, you need to get a professional. You can't rely on volunteers and everything else. It has to be treated seriously in the same way that any other profession is treated seriously.
And potentially, if there is a market, I mean, if the college is spending £1 million a year on food and the making of it,
well, probably 300,000. Or
yeah, £300,000. That you're kind of in terms of setting up a business as being sustainable, you've got a captive market
completely
yourself. So
yeah.
And when you think of the actual cost of what it might take to, you know, cover Alice's, you know, living expenses and time, I mean, we're not, you know, it would be a small investment given. I mean, I'm sure Alice would have some models for how much money could be generated from the farm, given, you know, from the valley, given the beds and so on. I mean, it would pay for itself over a year.
It should more than pay for itself, right, Alice? Like there's no a farm generates income for people. It's not.
I mean,
that's our experience here.
Yeah, mine has to be viable to pay my salary. Yeah,
exactly.
But yeah, it's around I'm rather noisy. It's around term times, but it should be viable. I'll turn off.
I think what Alice said in the presentation, which I found really inspiring, was she gave a few figures, and I think Cami also did give a few figures, you know, saying she's producing, you know, £20,000 worth of produce in, I can't remember what period of time, but, you know, we heard from Alice and others some really, you know, key figures that you're like, oh, you know, this is not just a game here. This is not just a sort of a nice thing to do. This is viable. This makes money. This is people's business, and there's no reason why, especially if you've got a captive market, no transport costs, nothing on site. There is zero reason why it can't work on the campus. In fact, in these times when, you know, relying on external markets is particularly risky, something is, you know, we really need to be saying there isn't really an excuse not to do it in a way, and sort of history won't be kind to us if we aren't seen to be taking these experiences that are clearly there's complications and it's difficult to set these things up, obviously, especially when things are so difficult now. But it does feel like actually maybe the stars are aligning, and this is some kind of sign. If contracts are coming up for renewal, and you know, various things are happening that make us feel like actually this is just essential. It's really, really worth us looking into this seriously as a viable way to produce food for the college.
Can I just ask something in terms of viability? If with COVID and everything, would it be possible to sell to the public as well as just within the campus? Or is that not going to be feasible with COVID?
I think for me at least, the answer at this point is unknown in terms of advice. Our expectation is we'll be essentially a closed down campus at the outset of the year in terms of visitors, but we'll have to wait and see how it goes, I guess, over the summer.
Just to give you a sense of the, like Alice, this is the Canadian example. A 4-acre farm here, is startup costs are about $120,000 Canadian investment. So that's building a packing shed and tractor and equipment. And then the revenue from that is around $110,000 a year. And the costs are probably $60,000 a year or $70,000 a year. So that's kind of, I think, what a business, a farming business, small scale farming business would look like in our context. And I'm sure it's different in the UK context, but at least that's an example.
One of the biggest outgoings, apart from labour, is the polytunnel, which is great that that's there, but maybe needs more.
Yeah, those are like 7,000 or 8,000 Canadian to buy those here, I think. But yeah,
I'm just thinking practically, Peter. I mean, would drawing up a sort of business plan, would that would that be something that would help in terms of framing the discussion, both if it means in the contract renegotiation or in terms of outreach to alumni for fundraising? I mean, if we can put a figure on what this means, is that right? Oh, okay.
Incredibly helpful, yeah.
So maybe Alice and Yule and Cami, maybe that's something we can. And with Graham and Sam, like sort of their knowledge of the land and what's already, what's already happening, we can pull something together.
It'd be fun to involve students in that. Maybe I don't know if that's a possibility, but it would be a neat exercise.
I think as well that would get buy-in. You know, if people could actually, if students could actually see how valuable this could be.
Could I add something there? That was something that I think it might be a good time to contribute the thought that I've been having and wondering when I should contribute it. And that is that I think we need to be very careful about making activities compulsory and making sure that it's a student-led sort of driven ethos. I mean, sure, including it in the curriculum, that's absolutely fabulous because they see a goal that is tangible, that they feel is something that they would want to do as an interesting part of their studies. But I think that, you know, they need to feel that connectedness physically and spiritually to this project is inspired by their visions and their visions of, you know, global climate sustainability at a local level, because many young people are really driven and passionate about that at the moment. And I just think that it's maybe a conversation that needs to be had with students about how involved they can be. And, you know, you've got student-led initiatives like workshops, like your Friday night lectures. You know, maybe that group of students would want to bring in people who would motivate other students on a lot of the topics we're talking about now, because they're really inspiring. But, you know, the top down worries me. The students must do this. The students have to do this to graduate. A little bit concerned about that conversation because, you know, I think that's it's giving them that responsibility to find these answers, and the more they're involved in it, the better. And I'm slightly concerned about sensitivities towards those cultures where some students will not see this as education. You know, I just think that again, it's a conversation that needs to happen amongst students about the different cultural perspectives around growing food and what their backgrounds are. And I think that was touched on very much by, sorry, I've forgotten his name, the lovely chap who's doing the project in India with the UWC. That's it, Ashwin. He touched on that as well, that there are different groups of students that do fall into categories around this type of project.
I think that's a brilliant point. Thanks for raising it, because we did talk about it in the last session, didn't we? And the first one, just saying that, you know, as you said, for some students, the idea of coming all the way around the world and paying lots of money to be sitting in a vegetable garden is weird. There's also a status thing, you know, this is below me potentially. And I think you're absolutely right that that's not a reason not to do it, but it's absolutely a reason to have a conversation about it, and that that, you know, that has to be the foundation of anything that students do. And I wonder though whether there's a real balance where if there was a way in which you said the idea of connecting to the land and being more rooted is something that we want to find a way of doing, and then it's up to individual students to think about what that means. How do you do that? How do you enact that? And I think activities like you were suggesting, like a sort of collaborative, co-created business plan, or, you know, I think you talked about previously the sort of well-being aspects. You know, there are all different ways in that different students from different cultures may find to get themselves into it. And I think you're totally right that we talked earlier in the week about learning with the head, with the heart, with the hands, and the idea that everyone needs a bit of everything, but different students will need a different emphasis that is culturally specific. It's just personality specific as well. And yeah, it feels like we haven't talked about that enough. Thank you for bringing that in again, because we did talk about it quite a bit in the first session, didn't we? And it is so important that is absolutely embedded, that sort of well, it's obvious in AC, but the multicultural perspective.
Can I just throw in a comment?
Yes.
Am I being heard?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, just a bit of history really. But in the early days, the college had a head gardener and eventually a farm manager. And when we were here, when I was there and other colleagues, we started the forestry and horticulture activity in the valley, which was the starting, which was a valid form of engagement with the whole wider thing, because of course we started a tree nursery, planted the orchard, and got the gardening going, horticulture in there, and the vines and so on. Well, not the vines actually in those days, but the glass house work and so on. And it was part of a whole thing, because there were was the head gardener and later on the farm manager. So surely that is part of a dynamic that could be then built on. And of course, the environmental systems course now exists too. So it could be an outgrowth of that, could it not? And I've been talking to Graham actually about links with organisations who have got teaching trees projects and things of this sort. So the thing could be part of an integrated project, surely, with the right staff there to hold the thing together. It makes very great sense, and there's a lot of it going on in other parts of the country already. There's even an eco schools project going on in different parts of the country in this way, you know. It's just a thought and a bit of history and a bit of looking forward to the future, really. Anyway, I wish you well. It's been very interesting indeed to hear what you've got in mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. And maybe this is a time, I'm also getting screeches from my children. Maybe this is a time when we draw the discussion to a close. But
can I just add one quick point to Tanya's, which is that I think one of the ways to overcome the sort of hurdles is for students, to see that through the curriculum, the Valley and these ideas are valued, because I know as a student, especially now with all the uncertainties, you are of course very focused on getting your, doing well academically. And so as much as there is space to be able to sort of carve out some time and say, yes, this is valued academically, that will automatically get, buy-in, because then, they see that that's the path, the path for them future. And I agree that we want to sort of see things holistically and beyond mere academics, but I would just say that as much as there is that capacity to, find academic connections, that will strengthen.
I'd like to just endorse Alan's thoughts. Sorry to interrupt. I was saying Alan leaving. I want to just endorse Alan's thoughts. Thank you very much. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but there we are.
Does anyone want to add anything else that we've missed? And maybe Sean.
We should probably identify some sort of next step, or it might feel like we're kind of hanging.
Yeah, but that's what I wanted to do. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about, before we go on to that, is there anything that anyone wants to add? Any other comments about any of this before we talk about next steps and how we follow this up? Okay, so just, I think it's worth maybe just recapping just again what we've talked about. So we've had these insight sessions where we talked about clear examples of where all of the things we've discussed are possible. Then we had this sort of ethos session where we talked about trying to identify what are the essentials, what are the essential ingredients. And now obviously we've tried to flesh that out. And I think this idea of it being cyclical, an element of ritual that brings people together and recognizes cultural aspects, the sort of well-being aspects of what we're doing with the sort of head, hand, heart philosophy, being absolutely possible to be financially and operationally sustainable, having grounded and clear principles by which we do this work, i.e. being organic or whatever it may be that emerges, and having proper knowledge and proper experience involved in the enacting of this to make sure it runs well. Making sure it actually needs, taking the advantage of contracts being renewed, of particular donor opportunities, making sure that we are actually turning this into a reality by backing on. Sean, do you want to just, we talked a little bit before this session, just planning out what do we do next, and I've heard Peter talking about presenting at the end of the month around curriculum changes. Maybe if you could just sum up what's happening in the college anyway around curriculum and how this may feed into this. This may feed into those curriculum discussions, but also how will we be able to, everyone in this group, follow up what happens as a result of these conversations? How will we capture it?
Yeah, good point. It follows on nicely from what Tanya was saying, because I don't think there's a singular approach at the college, and the curriculum innovation that we're doing helps to cater for those students who are really deeply involved in sustainability issues, and those students who might have a passing interest in trying to kind of sweep them up and grow that interest. So we've had the last curriculum running for a couple of years. That's kind of the land-based sustainability curriculum. Ed, who couldn't be on this call today but was on the last call, is taking that up next year, and I think that will be a really great way of engaging a core group of students on the land and their relationship with nature. So particularly feeding into the points that have been made around relationship and connection with nature. I think that because Ed's based on the campus as well, he'll become a focal point, and very much for students with a kind of philosophical and practical interest in the ecology of growing. What we need to do, I think, is build up that centre ground. And I think the conversations that have happened over the last few days really reinforce how important that is. And the ideas of building ritual and punctuating the year with focal points, I think will really, really help with that. I think we need to have that as an idea from this group, but then of course we need some practical action, and the way that could happen maybe feeds on into some of the thinking that I know Sam has had anyway, in terms of how do we integrate the students with the Valley and other things that are happening through the co-curricular programme. There seems to be some momentum building behind the idea that this could be an activity for all or most students. So then we'd have LAS, which is 15 students doing a deep engagement, 200 hours through the year of learning around these issues, and also an engagement by everybody maybe on campus. And that could be a really tangible next step that would be very much informed by the discussions that we've had. There's a wider issue, isn't there, around how do we make it financially and operationally sustainable, and the idea that's come out about having a business plan could be a really nice way of both keeping the conversation going, involving the alum expertise that we've got on this call, and also bringing in those passionate students to learn those skills of business planning and development by working together and collaboratively to maybe do a feasibility study of how we can take this forward. And that could be a lovely project for the last students to take on. It'd be a really nice balance between them doing some very kind of, very almost esoteric stuff around awareness-based leadership and ecology, and then balancing that with some very practical social entrepreneurship skills. So there's conversations there, I think, in those three areas for us to continue. I think we need probably to maybe come up with some statements from this group as an idea, maybe some statements that of principle and practice that might summarise where we've come to in the conversation so far. That seems, I think, like
what we were thinking of doing was actually taking the jam boards and trying to sort of assimilate them and put them in a bit of an order so that we can actually distribute them to everybody who's been involved in the discussion, because there's been lots of people who've joined the discussion over several days who really wanted to be part of looking at what's going to happen next. And then we will do a call out that who's interested in working on a business plan, who's interested in helping develop various aspects of the different suggestions that have been made, and then I guess it's up to the college how you want to make that visible, communicate that to the wider student and alumni community, and see who else may be interested. Because I think as soon as it gets a bit more specific, you get a lot of specific knowledge and a lot of specific experience of people that comes to the fore. It's always a bit difficult when you do this sort of quite general call out to people, but actually we're getting to the point where it's really quite tangible and quite specific in a way that I think a lot of people would be very, very interested in contributing to. So I guess our task will be to just pull it all together, try and assimilate all of the different comments and to summarize what's happened. Maybe it would be a good idea to ask Alice and Cami and Ashwin and Richard, who presented to us, also to maybe summarize the insights that they gave. I know we've got it recorded, but it might be good to have that as a sort of a couple of slides each or something, because it was so powerful actually to have those discussions first, just really demonstrating this is happening, this is real, this is possible, to energize this discussion, which I feel like it really has. So and we'd like to share it with other people who haven't been able to join us. So hopefully we'll be able to get that out to you in the next week or so, depending on all my deadlines, but I'll try my best. And obviously Sean and Magda and Jack helping out as well. But yeah, we'd really like to keep everyone who's been involved in this conversation really connected to it, and anything that people can offer in terms of help with business plan or anything else really would be really appreciated.
So, want a tractor? I got a spare tractor I can send.
Fantastic. So is the way to do that, Katie, to have kind of an open document that some of us will generate the key points, and then other people can maybe add to, and then finalize.
So the Jamboard will stay open. Anyone can continue to contribute to it. And what I will do is create a Google Doc, which I will share with everybody that's been in this conversation, which you can also contribute to in a collaborative way, because that's really useful.
Fantastic. Wonderful.
Thank you all very much.
Can I just take the opportunity to thank Katie and Jack for really stimulating our thought around this and the other parallel project around narrative and storytelling that's been happening. And Yul and Alice and everybody else who's been participating. There's been kind of a couple of months in the planning, and the ideas were very general, and it's just the refinement of those ideas over the last couple of months has been really helpful for bringing on our own thinking in terms of what we're doing, and that will, I think, ring true in the practice that happens out of this next year. So thank you so much for leading us on this journey, Katie.
What opportunities and potential that's opened up, both for Alumni Connection, but actually, the wider sort of educational community, and how, how creative we can be in having collaborative discussions remotely is actually really inspiring.
It is.
Okay, I'm going to have to